Project organization in Maya is a little bit unique, and because animation projects involve lots of files and many different file types, it's very important that you do stay organized. So in contrast to perhaps an illustration project or some other kind of projects that you may have worked with, it is absolutely critical when working on an animation to keep your files and folders organized. Fortunately, Maya has an inbuilt project structure that makes all of that a lot easier. The Maya Proj template is basically a bare bones project structure. And Maya has a way that you can create a project and set the project and set the different folders that different file types are going to go in, and it will build all of that for you. Maya expects certain things to be in certain folders. So maybe what will be simplest if I, in Maya, go to the project window. So under File, Project Window, you'll get an interface that looks something like this. And essentially what this is showing is where Maya is going to expect certain files to be. Your scenes are your Maya files, what you're building within Maya itself. Then we've got images, which are actually renders, what you render out to, and we'll talk about rendering quite a bit later in the course. And then source images, and that is where Maya is going to be looking at for texture files, texture images, as well as reference images. And those are kind of the basic ones. If you're doing more complex stuff within Maya, if you are importing scripts, and that's not like an animation script, it's like a program script, a little application that Maya can run. Then there's movies and autosave, and then there's even secondary project locations where different render passes, different cache data, and just it goes on and on. You can import Illustrator files, and there's all these really custom specialized data locations. All of this, what this does is tell Maya the first place to look. This isn't a hard and fast rule as to exactly where everything is going to be sitting in your folder structure. What this is the first place to look. But that means that if you follow along with these guidelines, that will make it a lot more efficient to work in Maya, and you'll be able to keep things organized. So jumping back to this Maya project template, we have a top level folder, and that's going to be your project name. That's your top level, everything that you're going to be working in Maya and accessing with Maya is going to be sitting in that. I've split this into scenes, and this is going to be where your Maya files are going to be sitting. Textures, and again, this is image textures that are going to be applied to your models. Renders, what you render out. And then reference, and I've created a folder for image references that you can get. That's the bare bones version. The more complex version, and I might recommend you do this with your promotional animation, is I've got something called ABC Promo Animation. The ABC is just a 3-letter identifier that I recommend you attach to your project. So that it could be your initials, but it could be just a shorthand for what the animation is actually about. Or you might call it the Terrence Donnelly animation, TDA, or something like that. So within that, we've got a series of folders, and again, these are just things that I've made that I think might be useful, but you've got references, pre-production if you want to include storyboards and color scripts and stuff like that. Compositing, this is where you would be putting your After Effects files. 2D assets, if you've got, I don't know, Illustrator files or other images that you're working in that we're going to be, maybe as I mentioned during your presentations, if you have an outline of a human, a 2D element, you might want to include that there. And then the ABC Maya, that's actually the Maya project. So it's basically the Maya project is sitting within your overall project. And some of these folders in here are going to be familiar. Again, the textures, the scenes, the renders. We'll talk about play blasts later, but that's basically a preview for your animation. It's a quick way to export your animation so that you can see the timing and all of the elements working properly. I've got data, a data folder, and I'm not really going to talk about that too much. Shaders, again, just locations that Maya is going to be looking for various things in. You might notice that in this folder, there's a workspace.mel file. And also in this Maya project template, there's a workspace.mel file. That is essentially what this interface is writing a little text file out. And if I go over to Text Wrangler, basically it's just a text file that creates associations. So Maya is going to be looking for scene files in this location. Maya is going to be looking for source images in this location. Maya is going to be looking for depth data in this location. So I wouldn't say modify this at this point, the workspace.mel file, but that's kind of the logic behind it. And what that means is you'll know that you can set a Maya project if it has that workspace.mel file. So let's talk about, I'm doing this maybe a little bit backwards, but let's talk about setting a project now. In Maya, you can either create a new project or you can set an existing project. And because I've given you a template, my recommendation is just to set the project to a copy of the template. So for today, if you wanted to, you could just duplicate the Maya project template, call it Maya project for today. Obviously, that's not a good name. And then within Maya, we can go File, Set Project, and then click on Maya Project for today. And if we double click on that, we can see that within that folder, there's the workspace.mel. And so if we click Set, when we had that selected, so File, Set Project, once again, Maya Project for today, either we can hit Set when it's selected, or we can double click on it and that also selects it, and hit Set. Now, if you hit Open Scene, the place that the directory that this is going to automatically open into is going to be in your Maya project for today in the Scenes folder. So it's automatically looking in the Scenes folder in your current project. There's also a little dialog over here on the left that has current project, and we can see indeed that it's set to Maya project for today. We could set that to another project, for example, the September 21st Maya project, which is what we're going to be working in a little bit later. But it also has handy links to various places in that project. We can quickly jump to the Scenes folder, which we're already in, or the Renders folder, Textures, or go back to the Workspace route. So that's just a really quick look at how Maya projects work, and as we actually work with them, it'll make a little bit more sense as to how they're structured. So once again, my recommendation for working, if instead of creating a new project every week when we're doing class demos, either copy the project that I've provided for you, or if you want to create a blank project, then just make a copy or a duplicate of the Maya project template, and you'll have all of those folders and associations ready to go. So saving files sounds simple enough, and it is pretty simple. You can do File, Save Scene, or Command S. But there are a couple of extra features that Maya has that can make saving your work a little bit easier. Because Maya does crash sometimes, and you are going to lose a little bit of work sometimes, but if you follow a couple of habits, you can minimize those detrimental effects. So in the options box for Save Scene, and again, remember all of these little squares to the right of the commands, those are options. So if we click on the options, we can get to changing some of the parameters of these things. Under Save Scene, so we've got this function called incremental save. I like incremental save and I do turn it on, but you have to be aware of how it works. So what happens when you turn incremental save on is that every time you hit save, every time you hit Command S, it'll save the file that you're working on, and it will make a copy of that file in another folder. So in my animation, I had to model a mouse brain essentially, or a spinal section. So when I was working on this spinal section file, I had incremental save turned on. And there's a subfolder in your scenes folder that's called incremental save, and it has another folder for everything that for all the files that you're working on. And I realize now that I'm doing this that I deleted them because they were unnecessary once I finished the project. But for the sake of example, let's say I was working on adult mouse underscore 22. Every time I was working on adult mouse underscore 22, every time I hit save, it would create a new file. 00001, 0002, 003, 004, 005. Those are fully complete copies of your file every time you hit save. So what that means is that when something crashes or you lose, something gets corrupted or something goes wrong, you can go back to those files. Now, when you go back to that file and you open it up, don't just work on that incremental save copy. Save a new version of that back in your regular scenes folder, and then you carry on as you want. But that's then it's essentially like making incremental backups of your file as you're going. So as soon as you turn on incremental save in Maya, you get those folders created. Now, what I would also recommend is to turn on limit incremental save, so you're not creating hundreds and hundreds of copies. I would say 20 or even 10 is probably sufficient. And so once you get to the 11th save, then it's going to delete your first save and kind of go through like that. Let's see if I've got... So the other thing that I do, I work with a combination of the incremental save and a manual versioning. And here's an example of this at work. So when I work on a file, let's say I've called this dining, because that's what I was working on. I'll have the name of the file, and might even be beneficial to have your project ID at the beginning of it. But then you've got your name of your file underscore 01, and then I add a little keyword that tells me what I was doing. So M is for me, it stands for modeling. So I was modeling. And so once I've got to a sufficient, maybe I've been working for half a day or maybe I've been working for a day, I've got those incremental saves, but I want to make a new copy of the file for myself. So I create 02 modeling. And then later on, you can see the dates. Let's see, March 9th, still March 9th, March 9th. Now, at a certain point, then I finish with the models and I work on rigging. So then I've got R for rigging, carry on, 10th, 11th, and then we get to animation. So then I create a new copy, 12th animation, and you can see they're automatically sorted, and I can really easily see that was the end of my modeling phase. This is the end of my rigging phase. So if I have to go back and work on something, then I know where I stand. Then T for texturing, and then animation, and then a clean file. That's probably not the best name, but that was sort of the end stage of it. So that's kind of how I work, a combination of these manual iterations and the automatically created incremental saves that you can see here. Now, when I'm done, when I'm perfectly happy with what I have, these things are just going to take up space. So I can go back and just clear out, move to trash, and just keep a couple of copies, because what I have is I've got the incremental saves from the end of the process, and I've got these sort of intermediate stages of it. So that's just how I work. I would recommend doing something similar, but ultimately it's what works best for you. There is another thing called autosave, not to be confused with incremental save. And basically all that does, if I go into the preferences, which I get to by clicking on this little icon down here, that jumps to the animation preferences. And if I go under Files, Projects, we've got autosave. I don't use autosave because what autosave does is it automatically saves your current file every, say, 10 minutes if you set the interval to 10 minutes. You could turn on a prompt before save, but basically I just find that it interrupts my workflow, and I don't like to get into the habit of not hitting save, so I just hit save myself. So it's up to you whether you want to turn on autosave. I don't turn it on myself, but that's my preference. So if you turn on both incremental save and autosave, I'm not sure whether the autosave will create an incremental file. I think it will, but I'm not sure. So basically what that would mean is that every 10 minutes, it'll save your current file and it'll create a copy of but that might be something to test. Again, going to the preferences window, setting preferences, down to files, projects. If you turn that on, you can change the interval to 10 minutes. I mean, 10 minutes is still a significant amount of work potentially. Part of the reason that another reason why I don't turn it on is sometimes I don't want to save what I'm working on. I'm just experimenting with a tool. And so then I want to revert back to my file originally and I don't want to overwrite that. Obviously there's ways to avoid that, but yes.